Anyway, I haven't lived in Wisconsin too much of my life. I've lived most of my life in America, but the first 12 years of my life left a lasting impact on my values and outlook on the world, no doubt about it. My parents were Dick and Ann Beers from Janesville, Wisconsin. Dad graduated from UW in Madison, and Mom went to Whitewater Teachers College. They were engaged on the shores of Green Lake, and already were talking about going to India as missionaries. Was that all right with you, Ann? And she said yes. Dad was admitted to Union Theological Seminary in New York City, where I was born, shortly before his graduation, a baby boomer. It took a month to travel to Northeast India, sailing on 2 different ocean liners. They would not return home for furlough for 5.5 years. After 18 months, they returned for another 6 years. We arrived the year India got her independence. Here is a slide coming up of India's new flag that was created in honor of the occasion. But that's my mother and father now. I mean, a few years ago now, 20 years ago, I guess. And that's the flag. And India had plenty of flowers and flower petals. They would be folded inside of the flag, and it would be raised up. And when they did something special, it would unfurl, and all the petals would fall to the ground. I saw that many times when I was growing up, and it was always a beautiful event. Let's see, where are we? In India, Dad worked with college students and helped a college be built, which is still there. I got a phone call on Thanksgiving a couple days ago from a couple from Northeast India named Jameer and Among. It was a lovely surprise. They were members of my church in Exton, Pennsylvania, when I was living there. And I first noticed Jameer 10 years ago when he showed up in church one Sunday. He looked so familiar when I welcomed him, so I asked if he was from India, thinking he looked like one of the tribal groups up in Northeast India. When he nodded yes, I immediately said, I know right where you are from in India, because I grew up close to your home. You are an Aonaga, right? And he looked so surprised, nodding yes. He was hired by IBM to work as an IT specialist and was on his way home to be married to his childhood sweetheart. They met in church youth groups from different villages, but they would all get together for different celebrations. And she caught his eye, and no wonder, she's beautiful. Anyway, and brought her back with him to America. Among was her name, had just given her early childhood education doctoral dissertation in England. So she has her doctorate. They were an educated and ambitious young couple. Jameer's family ran a brewery in the Naga Hills. The Christian churches in Nagaland were very strong, 99% Christian. Everybody was a Christian in that area over the last 150 years, actually 200 now. They were headhunters before that, and it was a very backward area in Northeast India before we got there. And even when we got there, there were backwoods areas around. The Christian churches in Nagaland asked them to shut the brewery down because of the negative influences on their community. They could see what was happening just in the years when they took on Christianity. They gave up opium, and the villages cleaned up, and there was hope again. And the headmasters in other villages saw the difference, and they said, we want some of that, and they made them all Christian. So it did spread because it was very obvious that what drugs could do to you. And I think we know that too in our country. So they did. They shut it down, and they found an alternate source of income to support their lives. And what they did was open a boarding house for students coming from rural areas to be educated, and they needed a place to live. And they went on living. I guess they had good income either way, and one was more productive. When he brought his new wife to church, I found out that among was the great-great-grandniece of Reverend Longri Ao. Reverend Longri Ao, you're his relative? Now my eyes fell open because I grew up learning about Reverend Longri Ao. And he was a well-known Christian man in Northeast India. He was also an Ao Naga, and he was commissioned by the Council of Baptist Churches of Northeast India, CBCNEI, to go to the remote Konyak villages up close to the Burma border, which is now Myanmar, to preach the gospel of Christ. He traveled in dangerous, remote areas and risked his life, really, to go into those areas. Longri Ao is still a household name in Nagaland, and one I was very familiar with as my parents had visited in his home and spoke highly of his courage and Christian convictions. There was fighting in that area between the Indian government and the tribal people, especially the Nagas, and they wanted their independence. Who doesn't? From government and from, but with government comes salt and lots of things that you need to live, and also a protection from invasion, such as when China invaded Tibet. And they came right down to within 10 miles of our missions at that time. Anyway, I tried to speak briefly this morning about my father's work to help start the first college located in the hills, for the various tribal groups to have closer access to nearby advanced educational opportunities. Union Christian College was the college that was formed at that time. You can Google it. I did in 2017. There's 455 students there now. It's on a beautiful lake. Anyway, a large parcel of land of around 900 acres in Borapani, which is close to Shillong, was donated by a wealthy prince from nearby Shillong to an ecumenical group my father belonged to. Trevor Thomas from the Church of England, Vic Sword, who was retiring from the American Baptists, and Dad was taking his position, and Presbyterian missions, among others, had been planning since 1936. For 10 years, they'd been talking about this college. Well, Dad he was in his early 20s and full of energy and pep, and he got out there, and he was what they needed to do the groundwork, to find volunteers to come and start the college and build it. And they were now looking finally at a site for the college in the hills. My father's connections with young people around India and all over the world helped provide volunteers for the many volunteer work camps to follow. They were 6 weeks at a time or more. And students came from all over India. He had traveled in South India. We never saw him. He was like a fictitious character in our lives. And Mother always supported him in every way she could to make him feel present, even if it was Christmas and he wasn't there that day either. So students came from Southeast Asia, America, Europe, Scandinavia, Canada, Japan, and those are the ones I could find in writings here and there. It was just after the end of World War II. Lifelong friendships were formed from working, playing, eating, praying, and joking, and just joining together with a common vision. Class and cultural differences slowly became unimportant. I think we can show some of these slides of them eating together. The college was affectionately named the Bamboo College for the first 10 years. It opened, there they are, building the road. They had to build a road into the site, and it was 3 miles. And they had to move big boulders and break them down and make gravel with primitive instruments and an old Jeep and just a whole lot of labor. 5 years later, it was opened. 5 years after Dad arrived in India in 1947. There was one student from the hills the first day, and there were 10 faculty members. I think they were called instructors. And people that, and then by the end of the first year, there were 10 students, and they came each from a different village and a tribal group, so they all spoke different languages, and they all had to work. They agreed to sign on to working and studying, to continue to build and maintain the campus while paying off their tuition as they studied. After 10 years, the first Pukka building was erected. Pukka in Hindi means genuine. I think it's a Hindi word. It might be an English word, I don't know, because the British were there many years. So anyway, the government wanted to build a dam for electricity, for lighting, and later it brought in the world with the internet. And it was a men's dorm, and there they are eating in the mess hall. I went to that one. There were just for a few days and played my clarinet with another missionary's kid. You know, missionaries' kids have to do a lot of things. Anyway, they would get tired and they played volleyball. There was a picture of the volleyball matches, and they really played energetically and got off steam at the end of a hard day of work. And they also met after dinner. At dinner time, they just tried to decide whether to eat with chopsticks or their fingers or knife and fork, because there were so many different cultures represented there. They had a lot of fun. And then they had storytelling time afterwards, and they had skits that they would put on. And it was known to be a haunted piece of land. I mean, that was what everyone said. You don't want that land. Why was it given to us, right? And but they did have one experience where they were joking around and somebody said, "The wall looks like it's moving." And everybody got real quiet, and you could hear some kind of sound against the wall, like something was scratching on the wall. So everybody's eyes, including mine, were big. And then the wall caved in, and there was a cow standing there, scratching his back. So there were a lot of fun things that happened. Anyway, the dam, but it put many of the original 900 acres underwater, but it was worth it. It was a pretty beautiful lake. They still own 176 acres. The college is still there with over 455 students. I told you about that. Providing education. And you can see by Jameer and Among that education went everywhere. It went to Exton, Pennsylvania. They were a very ambitious group of people. The climate was cooler. It was in the foothills of the Himalayas. And you could see snow in the distance, never down there, and it was the wettest spot on earth, officially. Type in the wettest spot on earth and you'll find it's in Northeast India. Yeah. Anyway, the American Baptist missionaries began to leave Northeast India around 1960 after forming the Council of Baptist Churches in Northeast India, turning over responsibilities to local leadership and deleting from the heading the words American and missions. American Baptist churches continued to care and pray for the Council of Baptist Churches in Northeast India, but they had done their job. They had spread Christianity to that part of the world, and the leadership there came from the Christian church there. And it's our church, the one that I grew up in, is still there. I have some pretty pictures from that one. Tibet was invaded by the Chinese army, and the northern border between Tibet and India was a hot spot because all the oil from India was from that area. So the Indian government needed to negotiate with China without complications of having Americans in the area. So as we left India, our visas to Northeast India were not renewed. When I said goodbye to my friends at home and school in India in 1960, I did not know I would remain in America. During my family's 2 terms of service in Northeast India, 3 missionaries just from our denomination had died on the field. That was between 1947 and 1960. One of them was Dr. Mary Berry, a woman doctor who fell in love with an American soldier who fought in Northeast India at the end of World War II, alongside with American soldiers and with Indian soldiers against the Japanese who came in that far into Kohima. There's a graveyard in Kohima with 78 plain white wooden crosses and a large stone tablet which has the following words engraved: "When you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow we gave our today." When Earl was the soldier, when he was honorably discharged from the army, he returned to India to marry his love, and they had 4 children together. Dr. Mary Berry had an infant when she became ill, and she tried to doctor herself. She telegraphed doctors in New York the results of her blood work. A telegram returned saying the results were incompatible with life. She was gone in 3 days. Dad and Eddie Singha helped her husband, Earl, by getting a grieving husband, 3 children, and a baby halfway around the world by plane. And that they were able to go by plane to their families in America. My own father was gravely ill twice during his 2 terms in India. By the time I returned to America as a 12-year-old, I had sailed halfway around the world 4 times on 8 ocean liners, and I'd ridden countless miles on trains back and forth to boarding school, 2,000 miles away, and had flown in old prop planes more than 12 times. And one of them crashed, not when I was in it, thankfully. Anyway, friends, including Jameer and Among, say, "Don't you want to come see my family in India?" Well, yes, but no thanks. My traveling days are over. I'm happy just to sit around and reminisce. Junior high was difficult, but high school was easy when I came to America. But who isn't it difficult for? You can be an American and it'd be tough. But high school was easier, and I later went to a small liberal arts college in West Virginia and graduated with my BSRN in nursing in 4 years. It was the first BSRN program in the country. I married and moved to Boston, where I took my nursing boards to be certified and worked in labor and delivery. I was there when a 12-year-old girl delivered a baby. Now, that was hard to see. After my husband graduated from seminary, he was hired for a 2-year associate pastor position, working with English-speaking youth at Tokyo Union Church for English-speaking foreigners like ourselves. It was awesome that we lived right in the city. We had a car and driver's licenses, and on vacation we bought a small tent and camped on the Pacific Ocean on the beach, and the waves came up, and I thought, wow, they go all the way to America. They're connecting us. I didn't think of the ocean as dividing us. I felt like it was a touch with home. Anyway, let's see. 2 years later, I have 2 daughters. My first daughter was delivered at Harajuku Medical Center in Tokyo by a California doctor who handed me a phone as soon as she came out and said, "Do you want to call your folks?" And I said, "Right here in the delivery room?" "Sure." So I did. 2 years later, my second daughter was born in Pennsylvania. She and her husband live in Monona, and I'm blessed to live with them and their 2 teenage daughters. Hi, Janine and Wendy, and Wendy is my older daughter. After a period of time, I got a job in a small community hospital in Pennsylvania, which brings me to my encounter with Miss B. You thought I'd never get there, didn't you? Well, I'm there. Over my lifetime of I have to tell you about the birch tree first. Over my lifetime of travel and 2 marriages and 8 grandchildren, I rooted myself in a summer vacation property that belonged to my mother's parents in the North Woods of Wisconsin. It is on a lake in Presque Isle near the Michigan border. My one stable spot in life where I could regroup and push a reset button and continue on, knowing God was there for the asking everywhere I moved to. I just needed to ask and reach out. The answer wasn't always the one I wanted, though, at the time. Up north is where I met the birch tree. So, a small shot. This Miss B and the birch tree is a small snapshot of one remarkable woman's life. There she is. Written from memory, as promised 30-some years ago. That's an old picture from '93. With intended respect for my friend, Miss B, and her family. And that's her great-granddaughter, great-great-granddaughter, probably, great-great-granddaughter, Kiki, one of the last 2 children she raised. In front of my window, in the North Woods of Wisconsin, is a magnificent birch tree. I've been watching it grow for decades. Today it's maybe 80 to 100 feet tall. That's my eyeballs guessing it, soaring above the forest canopy overhead. At some point in its life, it hit an obstacle on the way up, and there's a kink in it. It goes to the left a little, and then it straightens up after about a foot, starts to go back up. On its skyward journey, for years I've shared with anyone who would listen about my friendship with B. We worked together in a hospital outside of Philadelphia. She was my birch in the forest, my inspiration during long hours of working in a busy setting. She took no nonsense from anybody. She knew who she was, she knew what she was about, and she watched my back. I mean, she was there for me as a young nurse who didn't know anything, believe me, and the longer I was there, the less I knew. Anyway, we lived in totally different worlds. The hospital sent a van into her community 6 miles away to pick up staff, unable to find transportation, but anxious to work the various shifts necessary to keep the hospital functioning round the clock, 365 days a year. Equidistant from the hospital, but in another direction, I drove a light blue used Honda, my first car at age 36. I thought I'd reached life, finally. I will never forget the feeling of freedom I had in that car. We became friends and began to share our life stories with each other. She was raised by working parents who had worked hard to own their home. She was nurtured in the Calvary Baptist Church in town. You can see the church steeple when you travel over the Commodore Barry Bridge connecting Pennsylvania with New Jersey and the Atlantic shoreline. Calvary Baptist was the church attended by Martin Luther King when he was a seminary student at Crozier between 1948 and 1951. Miss B was a very good student with top grades in her class, but she was unable to finish high school. Like my Birch, she hit a roadblock during her reach for the stars. She became pregnant, like so many young girls, during a time when access to contraception was generally unavailable. Like so many others, she had to leave school they got married and they moved in with her parents. 5 more babies came in quick succession. The couple still lived with her parents in her childhood home, the home she was born in. And the teenage boy she married became an increasingly frustrated, angry, violent, alcohol and abusive husband and father with no way to make a living. He had also left high school. I had already noticed the gap in her smile from a missing tooth. You can probably see it in a picture of her. And the scars on her arms. But she described other past injuries, and my heart ached for her. By then, she was raising 6 children with no high school diploma. Still, she had the support of her church, family, and neighbors when she finally divorced her husband. She remained in her parents' home with the children, and he moved out. Meanwhile, Bee's older sister had lost her long battle with breast cancer at 32 years of age. She had been divorced and had 5 children. During her illness, she gave up her home and moved into the family home with Bee and her parents. Through her sister's illness, Bee was now caring for 11 children, along with her parents, elderly parents, and her sister, who was gravely ill. While still grieving her sister's death, a letter came to her from the county to inform her that her sister's children, I get choked up every time I think of this, that her sister's children were to be picked up by social services and taken to a farm nearby where they were to stay for 3 days. If no one came to claim them, they would be up for adoption. What could I do, Terry? She said. The cousins had played together, eaten together, shared birthdays and holidays together since birth. They shared their bedrooms together, no doubt, with 12, or 11 of them. The odds were against them to be placed somewhere they could even ever visit together again. Miss B felt she owed this to her sister, so she prayed for strength and walked all the way to the county farm to pick them up. She's the one that used the words all the way. Her heart was heavy, and it probably seemed longer than it was, but it was a ways. It was outside of town. Her parents were able to find other lodging and gave the house to Bee. They were now elderly, and this was best for them and for Bee. Bee said one day a very young child came up to her on the street and looked up at her and said, now Bee wasn't very tall, but she pointed down here. It must have been a young child. And he said, Miss B, can I live with you? She thought a moment, but she knew the family situation, and she said yes. Now there were 12 children under her care. Miss B never remarried. All 12 children, now this is the part that double gets me. They all 12, under her care, graduated from high school with honors. All 12 graduated from college with honors and went on for further education. One became a lawyer. They got their master's degrees, and 2 went on to get their doctoral degrees. One of them was the little child who asked her if he could come live with her. Bea told me her grown children had all had lawyers. Oh, they were all lawyers, educators. They were principals of schools, elementary schools. They were in education and in healthcare and worked with children and youth. So productive. She produced by herself with whatever God gave her in the beginning and whatever life gave her. She was able to do that. I respected her. So did the hospital administrators. Right down, all of them did. Birth control, but they all chose to raise smaller families. And some had no children, whether by choice or just they couldn't. Birth control, family planning, and women's health care had become a great game changer for women and girls, and in addition, boys. It helped everybody. One day, all of her grown children were together, and they ganged up on her. "You made us study hard to succeed. You have to go back for your GED and finish up high school." "Too old," Bea said, but they persisted. So she went back to school and got her GED, I'm sure without any difficulty. And with her GED, Bea was immediately hired at the hospital to work in housekeeping. But she'd had enough of that and talked them into putting her into the laundry room, folding laundry. She said her body was tired. That's how she put it. For the first time in her life, she got a paycheck, all hers to spend any way she wanted. The hospital staff recognized her potential and recommended her for more training. She excelled in her class, was rewarded with more money, more respect, health care, and a pension. Her birch tree was looking good, going straight up now to the heavens. With all her grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren, I'm sure she didn't keep much of that money, but she had the respect. One day, I suggested maybe we should just do something fun together, like taking a movie at the theater nearby. Bea loved the idea. I offered to pick her up, but she said she didn't want me to be driving after dark in her neighborhood. I said, "Well, you drive. Your kids are driving." I protested, but she was firm. She asked her 2 granddaughters to drive her to my house. They stood at the door with her, and Bea asked if they could come inside for a minute. I had my mind on the movie, we got to get there and all that. But I realized I should have invited them right away. So we spoke for a few minutes, and her granddaughters were beautiful and very polite and excited about our date. Bea was really dolled up, and they had fixed her hair, and, and she had a fur coat on, and I felt somewhat underdressed next to her in blue jeans and sweatshirt. Anyway, the show I had chosen was sold out, so I suggested she pick the next one, another one. And she picked one that was about a woman who had been in an abusive marriage, who unexpectedly was in a position to exact revenge. I thought it sounded horrible. Anyway, somehow it touched a nerve with Miss Bea, and she began to call out loudly in the dark theater in support of the woman getting her revenge. Bea absolutely loved that movie. If I was trained in psychology, I'd probably understand it. Anyway, I noticed that there were no other persons of color in the theater. We had a good time and a good talk away from work. I told her one day that when I was 12, my father went to the March on Washington, D.C. to hear Martin Luther King Jr. give his famous I Have a Dream speech. The day before he was shot and killed, Bea interrupted me saying, "Oh, Martin, he was one of my boys." "What? What do you mean?" I asked. "He came to my house for breakfast every Sunday morning with all the other seminary students studying at Crozier Theological Seminary nearby." "You mean you made breakfast for seminary students along with 12 kids on a Sunday morning?" I was sure she misspoke, as I imagined her house filled with children and seminary students both. "Yes, I gave them a full hot breakfast with bacon and sausage and pancakes and eggs and biscuits and grits, whatever they wanted, before they went out for their very busy Sundays, preaching and teaching Sunday school at their various church assignments. I served them right in my kitchen." "And Martin Luther King Jr. was one of them?" "Well, he was just Martin to me, one of the boys." "And I was busy in the kitchen," she said. "Did he stand out in any way so you'd know he was going to be somebody?" "Nope, but I was busy cooking." I could imagine her kitchen table, surrounded by young, bright black men full of hope and ideas, and the youngsters she was raising being exposed to the best of the best in the black community in America. What a gift. Bea invited my husband, Larry, my second husband, who was a keeper, yeah, and me to her retirement birthday party in her home. She gave specific instructions before we came. "Make sure you have enough gas in the car to get you home. When you come to the traffic light before you get to my house, do not stop or slow down, even if it's red, because there are a couple of hoodlums known to take money or even steal your car there. 3, I have a chair holding a spot on the street in front of my house and someone watching for you so you can park under the light and they will walk in with you." She was quiet for a minute. I knew she was struggling. She wanted us to be aware that not everyone was in favor of our coming to the party or of her inviting us. 2 of her grandsons had successfully finished up a tour of duty in Afghanistan and returned home with lots of celebrations, and they had training, mechanical training in the Army, but still had not found work after 2 years of looking. They could get a job washing dishes in the back room somewhere, but they couldn't get anything with their training. She had spent many long hours listening and encouraging them to no avail. They were angry and bitter, their self-esteem damaged. After a taste of feeling respected and getting along with people of different races in the Army, it was a jolt to feel unimportant and unusable. I asked Bea what we should do about coming. She was quiet for a while and then responded, "We have to keep trying to build bridges between the races. This can only happen when we open our homes and hearts to each other by coming together. We have to make opportunities for this to happen." After carefully following all of Bea's instructions, Larry and I were escorted into the kitchen where Martin Luther King Jr. had sat 30 years before. It felt like a brush with history. The room was overflowing with people. The grown children honored her one after another, each affirming with a laugh that she treated them all the same. They all got whooped equally when they needed it. They spoke in love without hesitation. The one that came into the family last said, "She never, ever made me feel like I wasn't one of her children." She was just one of her children. Bea and I moved on and didn't see each other again, but we talked occasionally on the phone. She told me her ex-husband had contacted her and they were talking again. Was she able to forgive him? I asked. Well, She never gave me a straight answer there. But I know Bea had a strong faith in a loving God, and she believed in the power of forgiveness. She once told me that there was something going bad in our country. Schools and families were struggling. Drugs and alcohol, as well as other substances, had affected white and black families hard. She said that none of her grandchildren had finished high school. Did you get that? None of her children's children got through high school. And that was in just one cycle. 2 were in prison, and others were struggling with addiction. Miss B raised 2 more children the ones whose fathers were in prison, so they were great-grandchildren. They graduated from school and went on to college. One of them was in the picture at our wedding. In retirement, Bea became a school crossing guard, protecting her little neighborhood charges as best she could from bullets, bullies, and drugs. When we spoke on the phone, I could hear gunshots in the background coming from outside her home. She no longer noticed. She was frying chicken one evening when she reached over the pan, and her clothes caught on fire. The resulting burns eventually took her life. Great-granddaughter Kiki called me about the funeral, and Larry and I went. I'm almost finished. Parking far from the church door, behind a long line of cars. We met 2 young men leaving the church and asked if we were late. No, but the church is packed. No standing room, and all the seats are full. Nevertheless, we were greeted warmly and taken down a side hallway through a door that opened directly into the area occupied by pastors and church leaders, such as this area. We declined to sit, but they insisted, and when we sat down, we had a clear view of the whole room. A large mural of Martin Luther King Jr. from floor to ceiling covered one entire side wall. As I looked around, I realized my husband Larry's was the only other white face in the room. I was saddened, but not surprised. I knew that many white people at the hospital knew her and had been involved in helping her. Where were they? The viewing continued, and after 2 hours we left, giving 2 tired pastors their seats back. We were exhausted from all the emotions we had experienced. The music and sharing of her life was powerful, and beautiful tributes just kept coming. The service continued long after we left. Mine wasn't the only life that was touched by Miss B. I loved Bea for all she did to enrich my understanding of her world. She and my birch tree up north both hit roadblocks along their journey upwards, and both continue to inspire me in so many ways. So Bea and I went to the movies, and Larry and I went to her party, and we went to her funeral. And we invited her to come to our wedding in 1993. She came with her great-granddaughter, Kiki. Their picture is on the cover of the story and was up on the wall. Bea lived in the same house she was born in her whole life. I, on the other hand, never saw a Christmas tree put up 2 years in a row in the same house until I was 36 years old. We both grew up with American Baptist roots. She was an American with brown skin, and I grew up with white skin in India. She experienced the civil rights movement in America, and I experienced Indian independence from the British in India. She knew Martin Luther King, and I knew a lot about Gandhi. I told her then, in fact, Gandhi was cremated and his ashes were put in the Brahmaputra River that went right past our house. I told her then I wanted to write a book about her, and she said that'd be okay. So I didn't write a book, and she's gone, but I couldn't really bounce it off of her. But I hope I did her justice and honored her. Today's scripture reading is from the Revised Standard Version of the Oxford Annotated Bible from 1962, which my dad gave to my first husband when he was on his way to Boston to go to Andover Newton Seminary. Speaking of Jesus, about the beginning of Jesus' ministry, the Apostle Matthew wrote the following as recorded in the book of Matthew, chapter 5. And seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, which was the usual position of Jewish rabbis while teaching, his disciples came to him, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, those who feel a deep sense of spiritual poverty, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. It implies they shall be strengthened as well as consoled. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart. And there's a whole lot of explanation about that I won't go into. And blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. And blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. In verse 20, Jesus says, For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And in chapter 6 and 7, Jesus taught us the Lord's Prayer, which Christians all around the world in all imaginable languages continue to recite in church. And he continued teaching regarding many other subjects before coming down from the mountain, and at that time great crowds followed him, and he healed a leper. That was the first one that I know of that he healed. Okay, that's it. You made it, and I made it.